Good afternoon, everybody. Feel free to grab a seat. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming out for the first installment in this semester's Entrepreneurons series. My name is Laura Heisler. I'm the Director of Programming for the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, and we are delighted to bring this series to you. This is actually the 5th year of Entrepreneurons. So I want to just say a couple of things about what we do with this series and a couple of pointers for you, and then I will bring up our speaker with no further ado. So this series is an effort to connect the campus community with information and resources about getting started with a technology or biotech or other science-informed venture. And we try to bring in perspectives from a lot of different places, on campus, off campus. We typically run a session with what we call a keynote talk from our lead speaker, and then we'll bring up a panel to inform and give additional perspective on the subject. And that's the way we're going to structure today's session. We do tape all of these, and we have a great video library on the WARF website. You can see the URL here if you ever want to go back and see other things that we've done. Because we tape things, we ask that you wait for one of the mic runners during the audience Q&A portion of the session so that we can capture your question. So we're going to hear from Erik Iverson, and then we're going to have a panel conversation, and then we'll open things up to audience Q&A, and we'll go probably up until about 5:30. And at that time, we'll invite you to join us in a networking reception in the atrium right behind you. The doors behind you will open, and please join us for food and drink and additional conversation. Please do have a name tag so that we know that you're part of our session if you come to the reception as opposed to someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. So let me introduce Erik Iverson, the recently arrived Managing Director of WARF. Erik's been at WARF a little bit over a year. And he comes to WARF having spent more than 20 years as an executive leading organizations and programs committed to entrepreneurial efforts that positively impact people worldwide. Prior to joining WARF, Erik served as the lead executive at the Infectious Disease Research Institute, otherwise known as IDRI, in Seattle, and before that at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's been working with all of us at WARF over the past year to outline our new strategic plan, and that's what he's going to tell you about today. So with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Erik Iverson.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I have been on a little bit of a speaking tour, I have to say. Just simply by show of hands, who has not heard me speak yet? Okay, I got a whole bunch of new victims. This is great. I was going to suggest that if everybody's already heard it, we could just bypass me. We can go straight to the panel. But I will give my comments. And like I said, I has been on the speaking tour. It's a bit like a rock show. Think of it as that, except I haven't made T-shirts. But maybe next time I'll sell some. My name is Erik Iverson. I am the Managing Director of WARF, Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. I've been here for a little over a year. Started last July of 2017. And as Laura had said, I guess I could just jump right into my... Whoopsies. What's that? Oh, here's our panelists. Okay, there I am. I came here from Seattle about a year ago, and out in Seattle, I had spent about 10 years at a firm called Perkins Coie, and that's a big law firm that's located in Seattle. It's the primary flagship office. There I was doing tax planning, a lot of work with small companies, transitioning from owners to family members or partners. And then I spent a lot of time doing professional baseball work with the Seattle Mariners as we built a stadium and all the things that go into professional baseball, TV work and otherwise. And also doing a lot of biotech work, a lot of M&A or merger acquisition transactions, a lot of financing, a lot of licensing, a lot of clinical trial agreements and those kinds of things. And then I was invited to join the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation after my 10 years or so of practice. And the Gates Foundation was maybe about 40 people. It was a pretty small outfit at the time. And it wasn't small in the form of financials, but it was small in the form of number of people. The reason I was asked to join that organization is because largely it was revolving around the development of vaccines, drugs, diagnostics, agricultural products as well, micronutrients and otherwise. That is the biotech space of agricultural activities. And Bill and Melinda were asking the questions, well, who owns the stuff that we're spending money on? And we cared about the constituency throughout the world, particularly the poorest of the poor, as we were developing vaccines for diseases or drugs for diseases that you and I really don't care. Well, we care about them, but we don't really have to deal with them all that much. I spent about 7.5 years at the Gates Foundation. My final year there, I was asked to build an internal venture fund to complement the grants that we were making. There was a number of companies that were formed out of the grants. They went on to either an IPO or a merger. The founders became quite successful financially. One of them at one point emailed Bill and said, hey, thanks for that original grant. I became filthy rich in the process. He sent me an email and was a master of 4-letter words, I have to say. And I won't repeat them since we're being recorded. But he really wanted some of that back-end financials to come back to Global Health to support the activities he, Melinda, and Warren Buffett were supporting. And so we got engaged into the business of providing operating capital to companies, taking some equity for that. And then I moved on into an organization called the Infectious Disease Research Institute, where we did have labs, had about 120 employees, about 60 of whom were PhDs, MDs, developing vaccines and companion diagnostics for things like tuberculosis, leprosy, leishmaniasis, influenza, Lyme disease, and some other indications. And as it turns out, the world's first leprosy vaccine in development, a biblical disease that it is, and in fact many, many, many hundreds of thousands of people a year are infected by leprosy. The very first vaccine ever has just entered clinical trials, and the trials are being conducted by Covance here in Madison. I'm very, very proud of that, and that was not by my design, but it was designed by my successors back at IDRI. But it's very neat to have the team show up in town here with this leprosy vaccine being put into phase 1 trials. After my time there, I was asked to join WARF, and I have been here. And I have to say, in walking around Madison, before I had taken the job, I was with my wife, who had moved to Seattle back in '88, and I had moved there in '94. As we were walking around Madison at one point, she is from Salt Lake City. She didn't even know where Wisconsin was. But I informed her, and she came out. She turned to me at one point and said, you know, this is exactly what Seattle was when we moved there. And she's absolutely right. Seattle was a relatively small city. It had Microsoft out in Redmond, just like we have Epic. Now, they don't have stock options, but okay, that's fine. We have a big tech company. There's a number of biotechs around. There's this massive, phenomenal research machine called the university. A whole bunch of entrepreneurs, a pretty good dose of early capital, and a lot of smart people with enormous energy, revolving around new businesses and ideas. And it's a really, truly exciting place to be in right now. And it was an exciting place to be in Seattle at the time. Just so happens that I'm at the helm of this phenomenal organization called WARF that is responsible to help take care of the technologies coming out of this university. I'm extraordinarily proud to be the managing director. I'm extraordinarily proud to be part of this community. And I intend to be here for a long time. And I tell my board that, and I'm going to try to persuade them of that for a long time. But again, thank you for allowing me to be here. So that's my background. So what I want to talk to you about a bit today before we get to the panel is really describe to you what WARF is. Many of you may not know what WARF is, but I'm going to remind you or tell you about it. And for those of you who've heard me talk, I'm going to remind you. I'm going to give you a little flavor for what I see as the entrepreneurial culture locally, and some of my observations. And then what we're doing at WARF, me as a managing director, but us as a team. The organization, we're about 75 of us. We're, I think, becoming a close-knit team. Certainly enormously intellectual and very influential, I think, in globally as far as it comes to technology transfer, managing assets, and commercializing. So WARF is, in brief, the Technology Transfer Office of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Most universities throughout the country, in fact, at this point, most universities throughout the world have a technology transfer office. That is, inventions arise on campus. They come into the technology transfer office, they assess the disclosures, they make a decision as to whether they're going to seek patent coverage on it, and then it is their job to commercialize those technologies. And that can be done either through licensing to an established company, or it can be giving a shot to a startup company, trying to identify a team and providing some assets to do that. As part then of our commercialization, the revenues that are generated, we share that in part with the department from which the invention arose. We also share a part of the revenue with the inventors. The rest of the money comes into our portfolio, and we make large grants back to the university each year. I'll talk about each of those a little bit as we go. Through my time at WARF, through my team's help for sure, is that as I got to know WARF and the university and the community, I chose to also go through the process of re-evaluating the strategy altogether. And so we've restated our vision statement, which is enabling the University of Wisconsin-Madison research to solve the world's problems. What I think that is very elegant about that statement is that we support the research on the front end by making significant grants. The inventors, the PIs on campus, the students and otherwise, disclose inventions, and it's our job to enable that research to become products and have impact throughout the world. Our mission is to support scientific research throughout the University of Wisconsin-Madison community, and that includes the Morgridge Institute, which is housed here in this building, providing financial support, actively managing the assets, that is the intellectual property portfolio, and moving those innovations to the marketplace. Unlike any other tech transfer office really in the world, there are a smattering of small ones, but really what sets WARF apart from many of the others, or all of the others, is that we are independent of the university. We do not report up through the chancellor of this university. We have our own board of directors, all of whom are alumni, and they advise us and oversee us as an independent board. And it's that separateness that gives us a lot of latitude that no other university really has within its tech transfer office. And in fact, it was the head of the MIT tech transfer office who called me soon after I took the position here and said, Eric, you have a monumental responsibility to really lead the way of technology transfer. WARF has taken that mantle and ran with it for many, many decades, and it is WARF's responsibility to be a leader in this space, from political and legislative and those kinds of activities that really others can't enjoy because they are part of a university environment. WARF has enjoyed many, many relationships across this campus. I have just put up on this slide just a smattering of some of the inventions that have really defined what WARF is, has defined some of the impact that we've had with the university and the inventors. Of course, Rock Mackie, who's on the panel, is represented in tomotherapy there. Guri Sohi within the computer chips, he's in the audience, I saw him, and I know there's a number of others. But it's just, when I look back at the portfolio of technologies that we've been charged to manage and the work that the team has done with this campus, it's really astounding to me. And it's really, I'm very, very proud of it. And so our core competencies, when we consider it, it really revolves around patent and licensing activities. We receive about 400 disclosures a year, and we make about 50 licenses a year, that is license agreements. That's a big amount of work when you think about 2 or so agreements per year. Each one of those is generating some level of revenue, but just as importantly, it is generating towards impact, whether it's on health or agriculture or new motors or whatever it might be. The revenues per year just from the licensing is about $20 million a year. We've had some patents go that have cliffed, that have expired, and so we've lost some really important revenue recently, but we're working very diligently to revive that revenue with new inventions and additional commercialization activity. The other thing that we're extraordinarily good at is investing our portfolio. We manage about $2.7 billion. Not all of that is ours. We manage some money on behalf of the Morgridge Institute, for example. And our returns year over year, 9.23 is nothing to shirk at. It's really the long term that we look at, however, 7.5%, and that includes the 2008 downturn. And I have to say that what you're going to see in this next year, given the markets and where things have gone, you're going to see many portfolios generate 12% plus, 14%, and you're going to see WARF generate about 7.5% again. And we're okay with that. The way that we've balanced our portfolio is not balancing it based on assets, but on risk, what we call risk parity, as we balance our portfolios, because we expect at some point there will be another downturn. And it is our responsibility at WARF, not just to manage and commercialize technologies, but we have this significant amount of funds that it is our responsibility to manage those wisely and productively. And so in the event that there is a downturn, and there will be in the market, that we are going to protect this university and this money that we're charged to manage, so we continue to make significant scientific grants on a year-by-year basis. So how much have we provided to the university in grants and other support? On a cumulative basis, all adjusted for inflation, about $2.3 billion in total to the university to support research. About $200 million have gone to royalty shares to faculty, staff, and student inventors. And so I think about back in the Microsoft days, giving stock options and making people quite wealthy. Yeah, this is WARF's contribution to that, where you have inventors who produce the disclosures, we seek to commercialize those, and we provide a share of that revenue right back to the inventors, and just as importantly to the departments, so that they can continue to support their overall faculty and activities and students. We also provide over $400 million of in-kind support. What does that mean? When I said earlier that WARF is separate from the university, we're not part of the university's budget, that also then means that WARF is entirely self-funded. Not a single dime has come from the taxpayers of Wisconsin to support the technology transfer of this university. And so it doesn't have to account for that or line item budgeted, but we're paying for ourselves, which I think is really quite a contribution. And I know we all do at WARF think that contribution back to the state and to this university is very important to us, and we take it very, very seriously. So the 2016-17 year, which just ended in June, we had provided just over $55 million in research grants to the university. We provided a $14 million grant to the Morgridge Institute, and we've provided a significant amount of funding towards other concepts going on campus, and that includes certainly the patenting support, but we also provide funding for the Accelerator Program. I'm going to mention to you what that is, as well as some additional programs that we provide direct funding to the university to support its activities. When we calculated the total amount of support that we provided, or I should say spend on our financials, it's about $150 million that we spend both in grants and operating support and ongoing research support. So it's really what we call the cycle of innovation. That is, we provide funds to the university to do research. The PIs and others on campus create new inventions, they disclose them to them, we seek patent coverage, we commercialize those, generate royalties, put that into our portfolio, then we make grants back to the university. It's that cycle of innovation. So that's what WARF is in a nutshell. It is proven to me to be quite a complicated organization and set of activities, but really that in a nutshell, that's what it is. So as I think about what my role is I was invited to be a managing director, and looking back at Seattle and the things that occurred back in the early 90s and the bubble that burst and the dot-coms and the biotechs that all got sold off and disappeared. We had this dearth of really not a lot of activities in the early 2000s, and as Amazon was growing, Costco came on the line, and Starbucks was doing okay, and things began popping again. So we lived that wave a couple times. As I looked back at what really that ecosystem was and the components, they certainly belong here. And as I did a little bit more research, I identified a Kaufman article, and Kaufman just really likes to beat on us here in Wisconsin pretty well. And we let Kaufman know that we're not all that pleased with their findings, but so be it. What I did is I found a piece that really resonated with me, and they identified 6 conditions that I think are really quite true. At the end of the day, though, it revolves around really three areas. One is the university, second is industry, and third is government. And I don't care what political affiliation you are. To me, it really doesn't matter. Government plays a really critical part in the overall ecosystem and the importance of creating a strong engine. This university, this ecosystem goes nowhere without the students and the PIs and the overall university. And industry, everybody plays a role in making sure that we're good partners, that we position ourselves and the technologies appropriately, and we all act together in unison in order to make this state, our city, our state, our country, and our world a very strong, prosperous, and quite frankly, environmentally friendly place. So the 6 conditions. Risk-taking culture. I reflect often on coming here, and I am from Fargo, North Dakota originally, so I am from the Midwest. I am a Midwestern at heart, and I do understand the Midwestern philosophy and mentality. I live it. And coming here, and certainly with a Germanic background, there seems to be a risk-adverse culture that is rather pervasive here, although that's being challenged. I know it's being challenged. People talk about it, they reflect on it. But what I saw in Seattle, and in fact at the beginning it was quite risk-averse, and it was risk-averse in a couple areas. It became less risk-averse in 2 areas, let me say this. And that is 2 things occurred that I watched happening, particularly while I was in the law firm. And my friends were creating venture funds, particularly those who were selling off some stock that they had. And a couple things occurred with them, and that was people would go out, take a shot at starting a company, they would fail, they'd try it again, yeah, maybe they'd fail a second time, but they would have the gumption and they would learn from their prior failures to try a third time. And we were always looking for that second or third try. And as long as they learned something and they became stronger, less naive, better business models, better outreach to the customers, better alignment from product expectations to markets, those kinds of things, they just became better bets for everybody. That occurred through the late 90s and then again into the 2000s and certainly to today. The second piece that became quite apparent, and I remember very distinctly the meetings at Perkins, is that we would not represent Microsoft and we would not want to represent the venture funds because we wanted all of the startups. That's who we wanted to represent at Perkins. I remember clearly the day sitting around a board meeting from senior partners to young associates, and we said, screw that. We got to represent everybody. And as long as we got people to waive the conflicts, we wanted to represent the investors, we wanted to represent the startups, we wanted to represent Microsoft, and we said as much, and we were open about it. Wilson Sonsini then did it, the whole batch of big law firms that began saying, you know what, we're all in this together, and it's not that I want this company, I want your next 3 companies. So if I screw you in this deal, I'm not gonna get the next 3 companies. So I gotta be able to represent everybody fairly, and at the end of the day, we all have to succeed and come out at the back end positively. And that was honestly a watershed moment for that city, and quite frankly, the West Coast. I know the Bay Area was ahead of Seattle in that, but it was that conflicts where we were all cognizant of it, and we approached it from, we need to treat each other fairly, we need to be diligent in the way we negotiate transactions, but we need to embrace risk that is inherent in whatever the situation is, and risk is at the heart of entrepreneurism and startups. Student body. Without doubt, the student body, and this article spoke to a concept called T-shaped students, and that is very broad in their experiences, but also in a vertical basis, narrow but deep in a particular area of expertise. And you see those certainly in PhDs, but what you're seeing now is a lot of the .com companies or software companies really aren't being driven by the computer science school. A lot of it's coming out of humanities, engineering and life sciences, because there's a lot of people who are just taking coding classes and they have a breadth of experience, and coming over to some entrepreneur courses and workshops and watching the number of people come in and how diverse the population of students is. It's just a wonderful thing to see, and it's occurring on this campus for sure. The third area is the culture of giving back. I can't accent this enough. It was in Seattle, we collectively, the community, referred to the philanthropic community as the nonprofit mafia. And it was because you're constantly, I would say, if not every 2 weeks, certainly every month, my wife and I were going to a fundraiser of some kind, and we were, whether there was an auction or whatever it was. The idea of giving back to the community, whether it's United Way or individual volunteer activities, is absolutely pervasive in that community. And it's not a redistribution of wealth concept. That's not the idea. The idea is this is our community. We have to support our community in all sorts of ways. And if it means volunteering some of your time, if it means giving some of your dollars, that's really important, and it was absolutely an underpinning of the Seattle community. And in fact, at WARF, we've launched a really significant giving program at WARF. I've also given everybody an extra day off so long as they go volunteer. And we're beginning to hear stories of groups of people go volunteer together or individually. But it's important, I think, for the community, and it's important for WARF. Even though we're a nonprofit, it falls on each of us individually to give back to this community. Fourth, abundant capital. I think a lot of people can point to Wisconsin. I mean, there's a lot of people who have been extraordinarily successful in this state. There's a lot of seed capital, I think, a lot of angel folks. There's not a lot of ABC round kind of money, but it's growing. Certainly WARF is doing its part. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I don't think I need to speak any more about that. Collaboration with industry. I think this campus has done an okay job of collaborating with industry. I think this university could do better, particularly fostering sponsored research with industry. I think it's very important that industry plays along in providing some capital for the research, and if we can strike deals with them and licensing or options of some of the background technologies that occur, we're willing to do that. But certainly without industry, in my opinion, having lived a life, I've hugged many trees and petted many bunnies in my career. And I believe whether it's at the Gates Foundation or IDRI, a nonprofit research institute, nothing gets to the marketplace without industry. And so we need industry engaged, and the earlier we can have them involved and partner with us, the better off we're all going to be. And whether that's because we want them to acquire a startup, or because we need their help in funding, or we need their development activities or marketing activity, that's so be it. But industry is certainly a key underpinning. And as I said before, government support. Since arriving here, people have pointed to the center of the city and said one word or another about whatever political party's in charge, whether it's the governor or the legislature. We had the same issues in Washington State. And it bridged across a Republican governor to a Democrat governor. Seattle tended to control many of the seats within the legislature, and it tended to fall Democratic, but it really ebbed and flowed depending on who had the power. And the issues were always the same. And they have a job in managing budgets and looking after the overall state. So honestly, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, that's a personal decision you all make. But I look at it and I say we have to work with the government and the people who are making the policy decisions. We have to work with industry, and we have to work with the university. We have to find that common ground and drive ourselves together. So we've talked about the core competencies of patenting and licensing and managing these portfolios, this money. So what are the other complementary activities that we do at WARF to support the overall ecosystem and drive our overall mission of supporting the research at this university? So I want to speak to you about a couple different areas that we're working on. One is maturing technologies, that is making them more commercially viable, but also supporting the entrepreneurial and startup activities on campus. So let me speak about each of those. First, I'm going to touch on what we call the Accelerator Program, and I'm guessing many of you are aware of this program. It's been around for about a decade, 7, 8 years. Greg, who's with us in the audience, is the new leader of that. He comes to us out of industry. We're very, very proud to have him leading it, but I'm going to summarize what it is. And Greg, you can yell at me later if I'm wrong. The goal of this is to really try to accelerate the commercialization of technologies. Let's start with the premise that when inventions are created on campus, they're very, very early. They're oftentimes just an idea, and we can seek some kind of IP coverage, or we can reject it. But at any event, it is extraordinarily early. And it used to be, in the pharma space, that pharma companies or biotech companies would license in just an early idea, thinking that they're going to get ahead of their competition. That really is not the case anymore. But it's not the case across most industries. And they want to bake the technology a little bit more, or in their parlance, they want to de-risk the technology a little bit more. And so we've taken it upon ourselves to set up a program, and we spend about $2.5 million a year on what we call the Accelerator Program. And what the Accelerator Program really is pulling in a bunch of industry experts across a series of areas, seeking their advice on the technologies in our portfolio, and then placing additional capital into the university to bake the technology a little bit more. That is, if you conduct these research activities on this given product, it will become more attractive to industry and more likely to be licensed. And the areas in which we focus, there's 5 of them at the moment: computer science and engineering, biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, clean tech, and food sciences. And out of this program, at this point, I think 9 startups have come out of the Accelerator Program, and Greg's telling me it's more, and it's more, whatever that is. But yes, it's more than 9, let's say. And I know every year we'll probably spin out at least 1, if not a couple more, to startups out of this program. And it makes good sense to me in the sense of it is much easier to start a startup company with technology that has been de-risked on a non-dilutive basis with some of our capital than it is just a nascent idea that's come out of a disclosure. Now, I've highlighted biopharmaceuticals for a reason, because we've launched just in May a second program that is a sister program to the Accelerator Program. And the Human Therapeutics Program, I know it's a super creative name, but it focuses on human therapeutics. And at this point, it's focusing on small molecules at the moment. We're very interested in looking at this as to whether we get into biologics and vaccines, whether we get into regenerative medicine otherwise. But at the moment, we're starting with small molecules in a few select areas where we think we can make the best bets, at least for commercial viability. And as I noted before, it used to be that when a disclosure comes in, you'd file the patent on it, you'd find a pharma or biotech, and they would license it in. And that's just not the case anymore. And I learned that certainly at Gates Foundation, but I learned that in spades at IDRI as we did more and more research in my organization, within our labs, to make the technology even more viable to be licensed. But then I went out and identified Sanofi Pasteur and GSK and others to come in and co-sponsor some of those activities to bake that technology a little bit more. So what is the Human Therapeutics Program? It's going to be a set of 2 to 3 professionals that come from industry, some of whom I would like to have academic experience as well, but it's really people who have had experience developing products within a pipeline of a pharmaceutical or biotech company. It will be industry-centric advisory board. There will be university PIs as well, helping us look at our portfolio. And we're looking at oncology, infectious diseases as 2 areas that we're particularly interested in. And we're going to spend money on these select technologies within our portfolio. Whereas when you take a look at the IP portfolio of WARF, we have about 2,500 patents under management. And so when you look across these areas, these indications, then you look a little deeper at all the different molecules that exist that might be useful within those areas, and we're going to have industry advice, whether it's venture capitalists, biotech experts, pharma experts, and some people from campus, to point to those given technologies and give us advice as to how much money we should put into each one of those to bake them a little bit more, to mature that technology, to de-risk that technology, so that when the buyers, that is those venture capitalists, the pharma and the biotechs, decide that they either want to help support a spin-out or to take a license to that technology, that we've followed their advice in the meantime. And really what this is going to look like, this is a little schematic that our team put together and our board saw. It's really this idea of these little chevrons on the top really are looking at identification of active compounds, looking at confirming the hits, just really working through them on what's called a preclinical basis towards animal models, for example. and trying to get a better understanding as the potential efficacy and safety of those molecules. And it's spending a little bit of money within this box here, such that when you get to this line, it's ready to go be licensed into companies. With the idea, and working through this statistically, we identified that if we take a bet on 30 compounds, one of those should be able to make it to the market. And in the life science space, that's really about a 15-year play at the earliest. So it's a long-term, very expensive effort. I expect that over about an 8-year period, this is probably about a $50 million program, which is an enormous program. When you think about, we could take that money and make a grant back to the university for early stage research. And so it is a significant bet that we're going to be making. And so we have to do this very intelligently. We have to do it with a lot of advice, and we have to make sure that we're following metrics and a dashboard that make good sense to us. So those are the maturing the technology programs. So what about the back end when we spin out a company? The entrepreneurship programs that we're starting is, when you reflect back on what WARF role has been, there has been about 120, 130 companies formed with WARF technologies and university inventors. And we spent a significant amount of capital. So WARF, I see it playing 3 different areas. One is in the education space. I'm going to come back to these 3 little buckets. One is the education, and this is where we participate with the campus, whether it's the law school, business school, or elsewhere on campus, D2P, and we help provide funding or otherwise activities to help support education of budding entrepreneurs. On the acceleration side, we provide funding for accelerator programs, the de-risking of the technology accelerator program, human therapeutics, the generators of the world and G-betas, but also we provide ongoing IP support at WARF, and we're thinking about how can WARF provide ongoing IP support, landscaping, and otherwise within startups as we think about how to make them as strong as possible. And the last is funding. And historically, WARF has invested about $40 million directly into startup companies over the past decades. We've also invested as a limited partner in a range of venture funds locally. And John is with Venture Investors here in town, and he's going to be on the panel. But we've also invested in a number of national venture funds with the idea that we would like them to come back and see what's happening here in Madison and hopefully co-invest with WARF as we support individual companies. Here's just a select sampling of a number of companies that we have supported with our technology and our capital. And then it was interesting, one of the scientists, a couple of them on campus, took 3 startups, just 3 of them, and wanted to identify what kind of impact those Madison technologies and startups have had, what impact they've had on the state as a whole. And so this person, Mark Cook, who we just sadly recently lost, was a founder in 3 companies, or was involved in 3 companies: Abbey Discovery, Complete Cytochemical Solutions, and Lactic Solutions. And what they did is they evaluated the impact on the state, and they were looking at service providers, funders, potential customers and collaborators, and they identified these counties throughout the state. Now, if you take the entire portfolio of companies, just at WARF, which is about 30 companies, I would say that we probably color in every one of these counties. And this is a really interesting data set and communication tool that we will carry to the legislature. And I know there's other people in the room who are doing these similar kind of things, but I find it very interesting, and I think it's important that we continue to do this kind of communication. So what did I ask for of the board? We have $40 million already invested. I don't think that's enough. They hired me in part because of the history that I have, not just in managing research organizations, but also because I founded a venture fund with Bill and Melinda Gates. And so they said, come to WARF and do the same thing. And so I say 30 million already deployed. It's really closer to 40. Well, I asked for an additional dedication of funds towards direct investments. And so I asked for a $10 million seed fund to be set up, and I asked for a $50 million venture fund. And that seed fund, what I'm interested in doing is funding a series of new startups every year, maybe to the tune of $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, whatever it is. I also want to put some of that money to work to guarantee credit lines. That is, I can ask for stock in return of $25,000 or $50,000 investment, or I could backstop a $50,000 credit line for somebody, take a little bit less in the way of stock, but get the banking community involved in this overall effort as well, because it is a total ecosystem. On the venture side, certainly the A, B, and C typical rounds, I want to syndicate all of that with other investors. We're currently doing that. Just a word. I have, as I go through and I talk about what we're doing here, this doesn't mean that I'm just going to hand out money. And I think there is some response by people who say, great, Eric, you've just got the board to buy off on $60 million of funding, so give me some cash. That's not the idea. That is, I am going to put that money to work, and we're going to be diligent in identifying companies to take that money. But the company, what you do as a early stage investor is you're first and foremost investing in teams, and then you're investing in technologies and the potential to bring those to market over the longer term. But it is incumbent upon all of us as a community to foster good teams and good technologies and good startups. And so I am not going to be a dumb investor. I'm going to be a smart investor, but I'm going to be a very active investor. And I'm going to be investing with the community as a whole within Wisconsin. I am very interested in matching Madison's technology with other system schools and identifying what combination of technologies would be very interesting in startups. I'm very interested in becoming close friends with a lot of investors, angel investors and otherwise, whether it's in Milwaukee or Eau Claire or Green Bay, wherever it is in the state. I am very interested in expanding the Wisconsin idea on this front. So we're out looking for a chief venture officer, and let me just make this comment on this front. When we posted the position in early July, I thought for sure that we would get maybe 20 applications, and I set the bar pretty high. What I want is somebody to join WARF to help lead or to lead this activity, and I want somebody who has spent at least 10 years in a venture fund or a venture environment. I want somebody who has spent time around academia, and if you've been in the venture space long enough, you've certainly spent time on campuses. And I want this person to also be an entrepreneur. Started one, if not a couple companies and have been successful. That's setting the bar pretty high. And then saying, move to Madison. I expected about 20 applications, probably about 3 or 4 to hit that metric. I have received well over 100 applications. Good couple dozen people who have met that metric. And of that, maybe a handful in the Midwest. The rest of them are coastal people. We have 4 countries represented. And the ongoing conversation I have with each one of them is there's stuff going on in Madison. We see it, we hear it, we want to be a part of it. And that is the conversation. And I would say we're down to about 5 candidates, 3 of whom have a connection to Madison, the other 2 don't. All 5 are extremely interested to show up in our city and help us in this process. And all of whom are world-class venture people. And it will come down to culture, I have to say. They're all smart, they all have the experience. We're building a culture of collaboration, of communication, of openness. And this person who comes in cannot railroad through the process, but has to participate with us in building a very vibrant, intelligent, and productive community. I'm down to my last slide or 2. I'm an absolute believer in the Wisconsin idea. I wasn't aware of it before I moved here, but I'm the strongest advocate, but I would love it to be the kind of global idea. I am a globalist after all. But the idea of having Madison participate in the well-being of Wisconsin as a whole, to me, it's a 2-way street. I'm just as interested in learning things from people up in the northern part of the state. What are the issues and how they're addressing it, as much as we identify issues and solutions and we work together in the process. This state is so promising to this country's future. And I believe, certainly, reflection on the alumni as they're located all over the world, this university and this city and this state has a dramatic impact on the future on this globe that we all live in. So I look at the Wisconsin idea as a representative of the overall mission that I definitely want to be a part of and I want to foster. And partnership at the end of the day is paramount. There's nothing that I'm going to do alone, my team is going to do alone, this university is going to do alone, the city is going to do alone. And again, we're all in it together, whether you're in industry or academia or government. I want to be a friend. So that's my story. I'm going to stick to it. Hopefully it will evolve and get stronger as the days go by. And I want to now invite the panelists up. We have Rock Mackie, who is UW-Madison faculty and mortgage researcher, certainly a serial entrepreneur and a friend. They're all friends. I don't need to add that. But Tom Still, president of Wisconsin Technology Council, and John Neis, one of the original venture capitalists here in town, managing director of Venture Investors. Come on up, guys. Yeah, I'll moderate. Good job. All right, let's just run down the line. Each of you introduce yourself and kind of what you do and a little bit of your background in the ecosystem.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Eric. Great presentation. When he asked about, who could raise their hands if they've not heard him, I think, I've heard Eric 4, 5, 6 times now. Whatever it is, I learn something every time. So that's really great about Eric's style and what he's brought to town. Tom Still, Wisconsin Technology Council. We do a lot of things, some of which are in the policy arena. We're actually an independent nonprofit, and we serve as a policy advisor to the governor, the legislature, different state agencies, a lot of interaction with higher ed. We do some connecting activities among investors and entrepreneurs. We do some mentoring in that space. We do a lot of work that I would broadly put in communications. There's a lot of things that we try to do to tell the story of Wisconsin and tell the story of individual companies and others. We like to be a part of what's so great about this state inherently, but getting the message out.
Rock Mackie, I was a professor here for about 25 years, joined the mortgage, started the medical engineering group here. I've started 5 companies and helped to fund many more. I have a tiny incubator on the east side that is supporting three companies. And I'm a co-founder of a association of campus entrepreneurs that is trying to advise the university and WARF about policies that could improve the climate of entrepreneurship on the campus.
I'm John Neis. I'm Managing Director of Venture Investors, early stage venture capital firm here in Madison. Graduated from this university in 1986 from the business school. And while in graduate school, I teamed up with Roger Ganser at the formative stages of Venture Investors. It was then the Madison Capital Corporation. And we had an idea that we were going to focus on things spinning out of the university. And at that time, WARF wasn't ready for that to occur, but we had the good fortune to back the first company in which WARF accepted equity in lieu of an upfront licensing fee back in '92, I believe. That was Third Wave Technologies, and since then we've backed 25 companies that have spun out of this university. And we're out raising our 6th fund right now. And I also get very involved on a lot of the entrepreneurial ecosystem here. I'm on the board of the Tech Council with Tom, and we've had the good fortune to back 2 of Rock's companies. And I have often weighed in on a lot of policy matters impacting the state entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Great, thanks. Sounds like you started your first venture fund before I was even born.
Probably.
So all three of you, just absolute rich involvement with the entrepreneurial environment, this university, campus professors, students. You've all been, you're all three titans of this area. There's no doubt about it. Rock, let me point this first one to you. Let's look at WARF and the strategies. What do you think kind of impact these strategies might have, and what else should we be thinking about?
I think the most important strategy that's inherent in the Accelerator Program in D2P is making sure that you de-risk technology before you send it out. I call it muzzle velocity. It's like a long gun. You essentially have the bullet spending a long time in the barrel, and when it comes out, it's going very, very fast, as opposed to a handgun. I guess that's not a good analogy, actually, but sometimes. But the longer you can keep something with the pressure being put on it for a longer period of time, you're going to come out much further ahead. So tomotherapy was basically baked inside the university for 10 years. Geometrics, my first company, for 4 or 5 years. And that does make a company a lot more successful, because you get the cross-section really of professionals who can evaluate and help you on campus. So I think that's one of the most important programs. And of course, being able to fund both licensed companies and now companies that really don't necessarily have a license, I think is a tremendous opportunity. And that's, of course, all of the other programs that WARF does that really are part of its original mission, tech transfer, and generally helping research on the university. But I think getting those companies such that, or those projects such that they're much more licensable or have a much better chance of being a successful company is so important.
Yeah. Thanks, Rock. John, how about from the investor community?
I couldn't agree with you more, Rock. I mean, a company or an idea, when it's evolving, when it's still in the university, you have a certain amount of luxury of time. And once you throw it over the wall into a company, and you have to raise money, you're in this constant race against insolvency. You have to get to milestones before you run out of money, and it creates a completely different kind of pressure. And if the idea can come out more fully formed, I think it bodes well for its long-term success. I think your plans to bring some more capital into the market with the seed funds is going to have a huge impact. Milken Institute, you can dispel a lot of the rankings, and the rankings are, we can all challenge certain aspects of it, but the Milken Institute did a study of tech transfer that came out in April, and I think we came out 40th on it, and which was disappointing. But if you looked at the different areas where we ranked, where we fell short was in startups, and I think a huge part of that has to do with access to capital. Our industry, investing in early stage is not like the stock markets. It is a very inefficient market, and it's really a social network. People look at deals in their backyard. They look at deals that are introduced to them. They look at deals that are introduced to them by colleagues they know. And it's not surprising that 82% of the capital in this country is managed in 3 states: California, Massachusetts, and New York, and they deploy 81% of that in the same 3 states. And when they break the pattern, it's with trusted co-investors who are local and capable of doing having that hands-on involvement that they can't do from afar. So more capital in this market for these very early stages, particularly given the amount of stuff that's coming out in the life sciences and regulated environments where the ante is substantial. You just can't get there with just a seed fund or an angel group. Having more capital in this market, I think, will be very helpful, and we really look forward to working together and further co-investing in deals together with WARF.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Tom?
Yeah, I agree that the notion of if WARF can do some things to keep fledglings in the nest a little longer, that's going to help with survivability. While forming partnerships on the outside. I think that's got to be simultaneous in terms of it can't just be cloistered within this university, within WARF. It's got to make sure that those connections to begin testing the markets are taking place pretty much simultaneously. I agree about more capital. We see that a lot at the Tech Council. Wisconsin has been getting better. As Erik mentioned earlier, a lot of angel networks and small funds, angel funds in this state, and a few, but not many, funds the size of John's venture investors. So capital across that spectrum, I think, is going to really help. And also, I think the notion of getting that human therapeutics program, and your 30-to-1 odds may be about right in terms of what's going to come out of that. It takes a lot of capital. It takes a lot of testing. The clinicals are rigorous. The market sometimes doesn't want to eat what it's fed. And so for you to get the kind of return that you're looking on there, I mean, a 30-to-1 is a realistic goal, it seems to me. About one company coming out.
Yeah. Reflect on the university itself. What could the university do better? Let's start on the positive. What's the university doing pretty well in supporting entrepreneurship and startups?
Well, I mean, it's a huge progress since '92 when we formed our first company. There it was almost antagonistic, and we went through kind of benign neglect, and now I think we are seeing some. The university is positive about spin-offs, but what's going to be important? I think the faculty get it in a typical department, and the chancellor gets it. But what's missing, I think, is the deans and the chairs. Until they're really asked to report on entrepreneurial companies that are spinning out of their colleges or departments, and have metrics that they are, well, you might have to tell a few of them that we want more companies, not fewer. But once they get it, that's part of their mission, then these folks are going to deliver. It's not just about students, I think, and it's not just about indirect funding. It should be about the really engagement of the university with society, and spin-offs are relatively easy for those engagement metrics to be measured, and they should start collecting it. That's the number one thing that would change the climate on this campus, is really getting a full picture. And the slide that you showed about the impact of those companies on the rest of the state. That's important information for the citizens of the state to know, and for the government.
I look back in the mid-'80s when we wanted to do something to talk about entrepreneurship on this campus. We were working with Bob Marshall, who was then the head of UIR, and it was a long process to just have permission to have the event. And we ultimately had to get a letter from the chancellor allowing us to have this event, to even talk about entrepreneurship on this campus. So we've come a long way in 30 years. I mean, I think the entrepreneurial energy in this community is better than it ever has been. So looking over the long periods of time, it seems like we've come a long way, but I feel like we have so far to go. And I do think there are more things we can do. Your comment up there about engagement and giving back. We've got 400,000 living alumni across the globe in every field, in every position, in every industry, with tremendous expertise, a really deep connection to this place, and probably with a capacity to both offer great expertise as well as a capacity to invest. We ask a lot of them to give, which is wonderful, and they've been very generous to this university. But I really believe that their capacity to invest, that comes out of a different pocket. And I think many of them would see it as an opportunity, and I think they would have a willingness to get involved. So I think we need to figure out how to tap into that more. I mean, the Wisconsin idea I think it's one of the most inspirational concepts ever to come out of this university. And, but the Wisconsin idea isn't something we should all be expecting somebody else to do. If you really believe in the idea, the idea is that you do it. It's not going to happen unless you do it or we get others involved to do it. We need people to step up, and if they believe in the Wisconsin idea, to become engaged and help us create more successes here.
Yeah, great. Tom.
When I look back, when the Tech Council was formed, which was 2001, if you look at the infrastructure around the state at the time, it was fairly sparse. We had to search pretty hard to find people who were engaged in the entrepreneurial sector one way or the other. And it was harder to find it on campus at the time. I agree with Rock. It went from hostility to probably benign neglect, but then to some active engagement. There's a lot more that has to be done. Look at the 3 tenets of academia: teaching, research, service. I think one thing that has to happen is to change the reward system. That part of service, meaning in some cases what the tenure track, ought to include the notion that you could fulfill that service by starting a company. I think that's consistent with the Wisconsin idea, which is not, at this point, it's not only just the borders of the state, but the nation and the world. So that's one piece right there. And I think there's some underutilized assets within the university itself. I'll just single out one, the Department of Computer Sciences. There's a lot more that could be done as computers are changing everything. They're touching every aspect of life. They're touching every sector in Wisconsin, including many, many traditional sectors. If the power of that department could be leveraged in some better ways over time, I think everyone in that department would be very happy, but I think it would really be beneficial to the state as well.
All right, I as you do with every panel, I give you a few questions so you have time to think about it a little bit. I'm going to go off topic. I'm going to ask you a question that I'm struggling with at the moment. As we have capital that we are trying to put to work, we have a ton of technologies. Some are right, some are not. Some you can see the line of sight to market, some you can't. And in any startup, the 2 things you're going to get wrong are the financials and what your end product is going to be. But with all of that, as people come forward with a nifty idea, what I'm struggling with is whether it's the right team to actually get this company off the ground and take it to the next point. That is it an investable team? And some of the responses as WARF looks at it and says, well, it's a cool technology, but it's just the team. They're not producing a good plan. I don't feel like they're capable of actually pulling this off. So it's a very difficult investment to make. And that's a rational investor should be looking at that. But instead of saying no and walking away, I don't feel that that's the best answer. If the answer is no, it should be no, but go and do this to get yourself prepared. I'm not sure what this is in our community and around us. I have some ideas, but what are your thoughts? What can we be doing better, and where can people go to become smarter, better bets to make as entrepreneurs?
Well, if you're waiting for the perfect complete team, you're never going to do anything. Rock, how many employees did you have when we invested in tomotherapy?
Yes, exactly.
One. You had one employee, so it was anything but a complete team. But Rock and his co-founder Paul Reckwert, they knew what they did extraordinarily well. They had connections to a lot of people that they thought they could attract in, and then they were very open to the advice of others to try to bring in a complete team and a well-rounded team. And you hired extraordinarily smart people into your organization, and were always looking for the smartest and best in every area. So, I think it really starts out with some of those softer qualities of is this an insular team or is it an open team in terms of their willingness to do they have a good understanding of what they're great at and where they need help, and are they really open and actively seeking input to create the best possible team. If they're more insular and feel like just give some money, get out of our way, it's that's what we watch out for. So much of what we do is just that, evaluating people and trying to make judgments about what are they going to be like to work with, and do they have that desire to build an organization that can take it to its full potential.
Let me just be clear about what John said in the formation of tomotherapy. He said, "We'll fund you if you hire a businessman to run the company," and that was both wise for him to say, but it didn't fall on deaf ears, because the first company that we had had no business people. It was people from my research group that went out, and we sold that company for a dime on the dollar. Probably it was worth $40 million, and we sold it for $4 million. And so we knew that we should have had a business person that understood the value of what we had. So that's probably what most companies need. They need to have either someone experienced in business or some extraordinary young person that doesn't have the ability but is willing and is coachable and has gone to the trouble of taking entrepreneurial classes and attending the now the Mortgage Entrepreneurial Boot Camp, and has the fire in the belly. And in fact, I think that there are just as many young people as experienced people who can be good business people. So.
For me, it comes back a little bit to what I said earlier about it's great that you can keep these young companies in the nest longer, but also expose them to what's going on outside. I mean, there are any number of things. There are a lot of great resources on this campus, and way more than there were 5, 10, 15 years ago. Pick the point. But there's a lot more going outside, too, and that's where I think some of that cross-pollination could take place, where students, faculty, others who may have that great idea can begin to be introduced to folks who have been down that road of starting a business, who have been down that road about growing a business. We have an event coming up in mid-November. It's going to attract 80 investors plus from all over. Things like that, where they can be and hear some of the basic principles about what they need to do next.
And Eric, I think one big role that WARF can play in this is trying to make sure that people get matched up with the appropriate advice early on. Because I mean, we've seen a lot of situations where it was not the right mix, where they had identified somebody who was going to join their team, and we were like, that needs to change before we get involved. And so. And again, we've got these 400,000 living alumni in every field, and if we can find the right people to get engaged and actually make sure that they're getting good advice early on, I think is critical. And then you can see, are they taking it? Are they absorbing it? Are they embracing it?
Thanks, guys. I have other questions, but I want to open it up to the audience. Who has questions out there for any one of us?
Hi, I'm Mark Etzel. I'm in the Department of Food Science. So this last discussion that you entered into about sort of the matchmaking, dating part of team construction, I think is really an important point. Because as a professor here for the last 28 years, it's a little bit of an insular environment here at the university. If you have collaborators, it's typically other professors who are scientists or engineers or from your discipline. And the last person that you ever collaborated with is somebody from the business world. And then you're saying that you need to put a good team together, somebody that has a business background. I'm like, in my bubble, those people aren't in the bubble.
Right.
And so you're mentioning how to match people up. And I think that is a very important missing ingredient in the startup and entrepreneurial activities on campus. So I'd like to think maybe Erik or any of you three could think about how do we change that culture on campus?
Yeah, I mean, there are opportunities. So join ACE if you're an academic. We have postdocs, faculty, staff, and graduate students. We've also helped to seed a postdoc organization called WeSolve, which actually is in addition to them being a postdoc, they go out and do assignments with businesses. We think, in fact, Mark Cook and I, the late Mark Cook, and I feel that postdocs are probably the number one resource on campus for being the bridge between a university group and a company. And the reason for that is, while graduate students are still trying to save the world, postdocs are trying to save themselves. and they know that most of them won't become faculty at tier 1 universities, and they feel that frankly, sometimes it's easier to do science inside a company or do engineering inside a company than it is to struggle as a postdoc. So do join the organizations, come to Entrepreneurons, send your graduate students to the Mortgage Entrepreneurial Boot Camp. Make sure your graduate students attend things like last week's very successful business school entrepreneurial event, attracted 500 students. And there was probably 60 mentors that did speed dating with that group. It was a phenomenal event. So there are lots of opportunities. There's going to be an event next month that ACE is putting on. I've been calling it the Association of Campus Entrepreneurs. So get involved.
Yeah, with our group, we have a couple of speed dating sort of formats that I think could work for campus-based companies or even just ideas. One will be coming up at our early stage symposium in mid-November. We call it Investor Intros. There will be, at this point, there's already 33 or 34 investor groups that are signed up there to do 7-minute meetings with companies that apply and go through a certain process. And, a company could do, in the course of a couple hours, 12, 13, 14 meetings and get a lot of perspectives on where they're going. Investors like John don't just put money on the table. They're putting advice, talent, expertise, connections. And so I think that's a great resource to try to tap into. We also do something called the Tech Summit, where small companies meet with big companies, because often those big companies are looking for ideas, R&D, supply chain, all kinds of things, maybe even investing, that come to them, and it's a great way to get introduced as well.
I mean, we have some natural obstacles here compared to like San Francisco or Boston. I mean, this is not a community of 5 million people with a large industrial base. So they're not in our backyard. They're not necessarily our neighbors. They're not, it just, is, we are what we are, and those other pieces aren't there. But what we do have is an extraordinarily collaborative community. I mean, in academia, you see it with all the interdisciplinary activity that happens on this campus. People are open to helping and talking and having, sharing advice and stories, and ask for help. I mean, try to figure out, ask a lot of people of who should you be talking to, who might be able to help you. I mean, certainly ask the folks at WARF, but, ask others as well. We're always open to early conversations when people are thinking of starting something. So, there's help within the community, but it may not just be limited to the community. There may be alumni out there who actually would love to be engaged, and there may be someone on this campus that can help you identify them. And if you can, even if it's not putting together managers very early on, just informal advisors or board of directors in the formative stages can be, good directors can be really a godsend.
Yeah, I think one thing WARF can do better is serving as the convener, as the, we can use some of our capital to bring people into town, to have meetings, make sure we communicate so people are aware of those meetings. The business school event, that was phenomenal. Honestly, I had my own board meeting last Thursday, Friday, one of whom is a very early entrepreneur in the semiconductor space in Silicon Valley. And he and I walked over after the main meeting and into this mentoring. Wow, that was Seattle, Silicon Valley stuff. It was really a buzz. It was just hundreds of budding entrepreneurs and all these mentors. It was a great event. And I have to say, we have to play to our strengths here in Madison. We're Midwest nice, right? And in any of on the coastal sides, the venture funds are very competitive to each other with their own pipelines. Here, I'm willing to share my pipeline with anybody, and I have yet to meet anybody that's not willing to share what the deal flow looks like, or what the next cool idea is, or to share a contact, or to expose each other to anybody within your network. I've found that really refreshing.
When we get to the point where people are getting crowded out of deals, they can't get into the syndication, then,
right.
then we know we have arrived.
That's a good day.
But until then, we're all going to be really nice to each other because we want to work together.
Yeah, that's right.
Eric, right here in this room, I just want to point out a couple of folks who they touch the university in some very direct ways, but also have an outside perspective, and it can bring expertise to bear. Paul Jaden's in the back from MadRep. That's the Madison Regional Economic Development Group. They have different sectors that they try to play in. I see Neil Lerner back there from the Small Business Development Center here in connected with the UW-Madison. Helped tons of entrepreneurs over time. Bon Wickenheiser's here from the Center for Technology Commercialization. They can help companies look for small business innovation research grants. SBIR is the acronym. So it's here, even in this very room,
for sure.
And there's a lot more that I could point out if we went on.
Yeah. Yes, in the back.
Yes, I'm Joanne Oravec from UW-Whitewater, and many of the entrepreneurial faculty and students I've dealt with have the horizon of being bought up by Google or being bought up by Facebook. And I'm just wondering, do you work with people in your consulting, your teaching and all of that, the WARF philosophy on whole life management rather than, and having exit plans other than just being bought up by other companies, swallowed by other companies, so that people have an idea of building their own companies and not just coming up with ideas that, and enough of a startup so that it gets gobbled up by somebody else.
I mean, there's two types of startups, one that needs investors and one that doesn't. And so if you can start up a company and bootstrap it all, you don't need investors, and you can run that as a lifestyle company as long as you want. However, if you're going to get an investor, that investors want a return, so you're going to have enough money to buy them out or have somebody else supply an exit event for them. So yes, no, I think we shouldn't necessarily only be thinking of startups. We should be thinking about ways that you can bootstrap enterprises, and those can be not-for-profit enterprises as well. In fact, many members of ACE have been from the arts community. In fact, the arts community is the #1 entrepreneurial community on this campus. 100% of fine artists, musicians, are entrepreneurs by definition. And why? And it's not simply because their salaries are lower. It's also because they're professionally involved in engagement with society. There's no such a thing as an ivory tower artist, right? By definition. And so the scientists and engineers have to sometimes behave more like artists, I think, and think of what they're doing as engaging society.
I don't know, Chihuli's doing pretty well.
Yeah, I just say, you have to try to grow a company trying to control your own destiny. And yes, the goal may be eventual acquisition, but you can't control when that's going to happen and if that's going to happen. And maybe the path is a public offering, maybe it's a smaller buyout. You can't control who the acquirers are going to be. So, you always have to be planning towards, how do I make this sustainable on its own in the long haul? And actually, if you do that, you enhance the appeal to being acquired. We had a company that had a very successful exit last year, and we were actually getting inbound inquiry, and we weren't planning on selling yet. And our CEO, when they asked to come and meet, he said, I don't have time to talk to you. Go away. And that just made him more interested in buying the company, and we started a process and had a great exit.
Okay, yes, next.
Hi, Tom Silke from the WEDC Board of Directors. And this is in part an add-on to the question before this, and that is that when you're looking for resources and support for what you're doing, don't look just within the boundaries of the campus. I mean, the Wisconsin idea can be applied in a lot of different ways analogously. Don't look just in Dane County. It's obviously the sweet spot for a lot of things that happen here. But when John mentioned the industrial base, the state of Wisconsin has a phenomenal industrial base. The food industry has a phenomenal base in the state. And I think, WARF and the university can look at the state boundaries and maybe even beyond. I worked for a number of years for Stanford's technology transfer office. They didn't look at the campus. They didn't look at Palo Alto. They didn't look at the South Bay. They looked anywhere people could find the support, and people would respond to that. And I think that looking beyond what's happening, and WEDC tries to facilitate some of that. Some of it's beyond our mission. But there are other resources, there are industry groups, there are other university campuses that can help provide support. And I think Erik's right, looking to other campuses, looking to the academic community more broadly to support one another and to try to bring down, I live in Milwaukee, and I've never understood the difficulty in getting from one end of I-94 to the other in certain respects. But the food industry is a great example of where that should be happening more.
Thanks.
Let me follow Tom's observation with just a show of hands here. And this is basically for new or aspiring entrepreneurs, not folks who have been down that road. How many of you are thinking about starting a company? Okay.
Awesome.
So fair number of hands. How many of you are of that group would be aware of some of the things that are offered through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, for example? Maybe a few. So it's a good example, again, of an outside resource that perhaps is not well known and could be tapped into in a variety of ways. For example, they run a program called the Qualified New Business Venture Program. If you go through that and you are certified, then your investors are eligible for tax credits under a state law that's been in place for 12 years now. So that's just one example. They have an entrepreneurship and innovation division within that agency. Again, an outside resource, as Tom noted.
I'd like to do the same thing. How many graduate students and postdocs here? Hands up. Okay. In fact, the president of WeSolve has got his hand up. Keep your hand up longer, John. Well, both of you are on the board of WeSolve. So again, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, and you're a graduate student or a postdoc, you should talk to those two gentlemen right there.
All right, you will be bombarded. That's great. Other questions?
Oh,
Hold on a second. We have a microphone that's going to run to you pretty quick. It's coming.
Hi there. So Eric, you mentioned that it is important that industry collaborates with academia so that things can get out the door. That's a key component to successful commercialization. So if you're a grad student or you're a postdoc researcher in the room and you're serious about getting to that level, maybe you have research funding from NIH, NSF, how can we tap into the WARF resources to connect with someone from industry and say, hey, how can we make this project relevant to problems that you have?
I'm interested not on an... there are a lot of students and a lot of researchers on this campus. The idea of responding to one-off is quite difficult. In fact, I would say it'd next to be impossible, if not just we wouldn't be able to do it. I am very interested in, however, in taking the wealth of relationships that WARF has. I mean, it is the very being of WARF, is to connect with industry to commercialize technologies through startups or very old school companies. And using those relationships and fostering further relationships with people on campus, whether it's inviting teams in, venture capitalists, and I'm having these conversations already. Intel Ventures was in town recently, for example. The guy I met with happened to be married to a woman from Madison. So she wanted to visit her family. He came to town. He's like, who's in town? Let me meet some people. We sat down for breakfast. And we talked about what the areas of his interest or Intel Ventures interests are and explained a number of them. Certainly computer science, but sports was one area that I wasn't anticipating him talking about, to ag and food and those kinds of things. And I thought, well, why don't you bring a team in? Let's take our WARF team and reach out to some campus people and start making introductions. We did it with Johnsonville. We'll do it with, GE Healthcare's already got great relationships, but we can go across our Rolodex of companies, of venture funds, invite people in town. This is that convening power that WARF might have. Identify PIs and other researchers on campus and say, let's just get in a room and talk about industry. What are your needs? And campus, what are you all working on? And what are you interested in doing? And begin just seeding relationships and seeing if the individuals can then take it from there. I think that's a key role WARF should be playing more of. And I'm committed, and the team is committed to fostering those kinds of relationships. We manage this town center, and it's so very well, and it's these kinds of resources that we should be putting to work doing things like that.
One piece of advice I'd give any young entrepreneur is there's a point in time in the process or throughout the process where put down the keyboard and stay off of Google and revert to an older piece of technology called the telephone and talk to people. I mean, reach out to people and have conversations. Google will only answer questions you ask, if you know the right questions to ask. If you actually pick up the phone and start talking to people, they will bring things to your attention that you didn't even consider that you ought to be thinking about, that you ought to be asking about. Nothing can replace face-to-face human interaction, phone conversations, networking events. You will learn so much more by doing that. And I'm often astounded how often there's people I talk to and they haven't reached out enough and had those conversations that needed to be had.
One of the and I think we're done, aren't we? One of the let me close it with this because I want to echo that. My original mentor, the first boss I had in Seattle, at a Seattle law firm, mandated on me. It wasn't advice. It was a mandate that every week I have coffee or lunch with somebody new I had not talked with before. And I thought, how the heck am I going to do that? I'm a young kid just starting at a law firm. I don't have, I didn't have a budget to do it, anything like that. But that was the mandate, and I followed through with it. And I don't always get the chance anymore, but the network grows exponentially. And there's a rhythm that you have with business people, and I owe some introductions to people. But the rhythm that you wind up is, why are you doing what you're proposing to do? How are you going to do it? And here's 2 or 3 people you should talk with. The rhythm's the same. Anybody you talk to, a business person, an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, an angel investor, I find that rhythm constant, and I try to carry that through on my own. So, to pick up on what John is saying, make it a point. Meet new people constantly. Force yourself through that process, and you'll be amazed at what gestates out of that process. Thanks, gentlemen, very much. I really sincerely appreciate your time. And thank you, everybody.